So welcome to this Fringe meeting. I have the pleasure to present the findings of a research project we started at the last EPSU Congress in Dublin, where we also had a Fringe meeting. And the starting point was that European interventions after the financial crisis started to affect areas that were supposed to be outside the governance area of the European Union, namely wages and public sector delivery like healthcare. But because the European Union introduced a new economic governance regime to adjust macroeconomic imbalance and to ensure the proper functioning of the European economy, they found a way around to intervene also in these areas. But they did that not like in the case of the Bolkestein Directive with a European law that was applicable to everybody, but they did that on a salami-slice tactics with national prescriptions. First, in the Troika programs for Ireland, in the Memorandum of Understanding for countries like Hungary and Romania, and after 2011, also for all countries, after the adoption of the so-called new six-pack laws on economic governance. So henceforth, countries were told to change wage bargaining structures, to reduce wages, to commodify public services, turn them more into market-like operations. And after COVID, there was a change. So there was suddenly more money, so not austerity anymore, but what we have analyzed also is that the commodification agenda continues in public service. So there is now more public money, but public money for private gain. For instance, not to pay more workers in the hospitals, but to pay IT equipment, computer equipment, but not to address the staff shortages. And ironically, it was the public sector trade unions like EPSU that were most alert and mobilized, as we have seen here on the book title. And we showed that actually public service trade unionism was on the forefront of Europeanizing the struggle about the direction of European interventions. Thus the title Politicizing Commodification, which sounds a bit awkward, but what we want to say with that is we analyze the protest movements that politicize not the question, is it national, is it European, but what matters most is in which policy direction do the interventions go, towards marketization, towards commercialization or not. So I'm very happy to introduce our panelists for today's session. And we start with Dominika Bigan, which will tell us what impression the book made to you. So I won't say more about the book because we want to have a debate and see what you take from the book. And Dominika is in charge of economic governance, among other things, in the German Trade Union Confederation, DGB. And then we have our three panelists that will look at these economic governance interventions from a healthcare perspective. So first, Dominika, what is your take? And then I come down and we take a discussion there.
Great. Thank you, Roland, for the nice introduction. I hope you can all hear me. Do I have to get... I have to be very close, right? Okay, I feared it. Okay, so what did I learn from the book? What the book gave to me is, the book is basically about the character or the logic of EU economic governance, and in particular, the logic below or behind the European semester, which has become the cornerstone of the new economic governance regime since 2011. And what I found, I have been dealing with the European semester and EU economic governance in the German Trade Union Confederation for 6 years now, and I find the book extremely insightful and also helpful for my political work, and I would like to point out 2 points in particular. So first of all, the book provides a political lens to analyze the policy recommendations in the context of the European semester. I don't know how all of you are aware of the European semester, but it goes like this, that the European Commission usually publishes so-called country-specific recommendations every year. And member states are obliged to implement these country-specific recommendations. Otherwise, the European Commission can sanction these member states with financial fines, or it can threaten to cut funding from EU programs. And these country-specific recommendations are very diverse and very heterogeneous and target very, very different policy fields, ranging from education policy to pension policy to health care policy and, of course, fiscal policy. And it is very difficult to see the broad picture behind all these recommendations, which are very specific and heterogeneous. And here is where the book comes in. It provides a political lens to analyze these country-specific recommendations. And there have been a range of other researchers who have also provided different analytical lenses. And there has been the thesis, for instance, by other researchers, that there has been a socialization of the European semester in the last years, in the sense that social policy issues or social objectives of policies have become more prominent. And the analysis that Roland and his authors have done rather point to a different direction. Namely that there is like a liberalizing or marketization logic inherent in the country-specific recommendations in the last 10 years and over all countries. And this is what he calls commodification. I think we trade unionists would call it liberal bias or neoliberal bias of these policy recommendations. And the authors convincingly argue that there is this neoliberal bias, and they see a commodifying or marketization logic in almost all countries over time. The EU has explicitly asked governments to promote public-private partnerships, the privatization and downsizing of public services, the flexibilization of the labor market and collective bargaining structures. And this commodification or liberalization logic, as I said, is like a dominant scheme over time and between the countries. So the first main takeaway I get from the book is that there has not been a socialization of the European semester. Rather, and this is what the authors argue and what I would think is a very adequate description of the empirical landscape, is that the character of the reforms have changed. Whereas the European Commission was rather offensive after the financial crisis, demanding cuts in public spending and wage cuts. The Commission now, after 2014, has more demanded structural reforms, demanding more flexibility in terms of collective bargaining structures, more flexibility in terms of labor market structures, and demanding more privatization of public services, or introducing a privatization logic in public services. And this is a very important political insight for me, and I think for the trade union movement in general, because the European semester has become all the more important in the last years, and it will become even more important in the next years. In the current mandate, the European semester and the policy recommendations have been linked very closely to the Recovery and Resilience Facility. That means that funding from this massive fund was only dispersed if member states implemented these reform proposals. And this is now like a blueprint for the European Commission. It wants to transfer to other funding schemes as well, in particular the structural funds. So for us trade unions, it is very important to see what kind of beast is this European semester. Does it have a neoliberal logic in it or not, or is there like a socialization trend? And yeah, and here the book gives a very clear answer. Okay, the second point I want to underline is what the authors also do is what the political consequences of these policy approach are, namely this very country-specific approach of recommending very specific recommendations and making these outside the legislative sphere. And then the authors argue that this has massive political consequences for the trade union movement or for social movements in general, because it makes it very difficult for us to mobilize against these policy recommendations. And this is also a thesis which I find very convincing. So it is difficult for us to mobilize against these policy recommendations by the European Commission because they are done outside a legislative sphere. The European Commission does not propose it massively intervenes in pension schemes, in the healthcare sector, but it does not propose a regulation or directive for a harmonization of pension schemes, which would make it easier for us to mobilize opposition against it, but it does so in a very behind closed doors in political fora that are not open to the public. There are no parliaments involved in the formulation of this country-specific recommendations, neither the European Parliament nor the national parliaments. We cannot use our network structures, our usual lobbying strategies to influence this process. So this is the first point why it is difficult for us to mobilize against this. And the second point why it is difficult for us to mobilize against these rather neoliberal policy recommendations is because they are country-specific. In Germany, the pension system is target. In other countries, the health system is target. In other countries, public services are targeted. And this makes it difficult you cannot mobilize like a pan-European opposition for French pension reforms, although it is very clear that the driver are the European institutions. So this is like a very gloomy outlook at the end of the book. I would say that one option would be for trade unions, in order to overcome the structural problems of the European semester, would be to radically demand a democratization of the European semester. At the end of the book, you rather get the impression, let's get rid of the European semester at all. What is in there is really not something that trade unions can support. I think that this is rather an unrealistic option. I'm open to discuss it with you. I think the way forward, because the European semester is here to stay, it has become even more important, will become more important, and I think democratizing it, having parliaments a say in the formulation of the country-specific recommendations would be a way forward, and it should be like a key demand for trade unions in the EU economic governance regime in the next years. Yeah, I can recommend reading the book, and I think we now have more insights from the health policy perspective, and I hand over, I think, to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a very brief and very precise summary of something that took us 6 years to come around, to decode all this technical language, to really understand what is meant. And healthcare is an interesting thing, because one of the most prominent prescription in healthcare is make healthcare spending more cost effective. So what does that mean? It could mean the same level of healthcare spending, and then we are more efficient, and we have more healthcare for everybody, and we would be happy. But only when we analyze the context and the connections made in the document, we realize that actually what was meant in all cases was do the same level of healthcare delivery with less money. And this you only understand if you delve in and try to decode what is actually meant. So we now have a panel of healthcare activists and trade unionists, and I start with Razvan, who was already part of the EPSU Congress in Dublin when we first proposed this. And as we mentioned, it's not just Troika, also non-Troika countries were part of Memorandum of Understanding. Romania in particular, although Romania public deficit was half the size of the deficit of Germany, but they unfortunately had the deficit with Greek banks and Italian banks and German banks, so they forced them into a Troika program nevertheless. So you realized the wage cuts that we realized also in Ireland. But now we would like to hear how, Razvan, how did you respond to the book and how did you manage to get so many people to join from Romania to go to the European protests in 2022? Yeah, here. So you see also Romanian trade union flag on this one here. So how did so many people from Bucharest, 200, 300 people, take the minibuses to go to the demonstration of EPSU? And Razvan is an interesting person because he's not only the deputy president of the nurses union Sanitas here, but he was also maybe working too much, doing trade union work during the week and then the weekend night shifts in the hospital as a nurse. So he's himself a nurse.
Thank you, Roland. I have a rare occasion to speak in my mother tongue, so I will switch to Romanian. Please use your headset. Da, mulțumesc încă o dată pentru invitație. Este o onoare, cum a fost și la Dublin, de a face parte din acest panel. Aș putea să vă spun experiența mea ca sindicalist și ca și asistent medical, care din 1992 până în martie anul acesta, când am renunțat datorită supra-solicitării, ca să nu spun direct burnout. Da, am lucrat în chirurgie din 1992, din decembrie, când m-am angajat ca asistent medical și începând cu 1997 am urcat pe zona aceasta de sindicat, ajungând undeva în 2012 vicepreședinte al Federației Sanitas din România și în 2018 vicepreședinte al Comisiei Permanente pentru Sănătate și Servicii Sociale de la EPSU. Scurt de tot, a fost o introducere despre mine. În tot acest timp am lucrat, așa cum a spus și Roland, de luni până vineri 100% sindicalist, sâmbătă și duminică 100% asistent medical, în sălile de pansamente. Practic, tratam pacienții după ce aceștia erau operați în zona de chirurgie generală, undeva 15 ani și alți 5 ani în chirurgie vasculară. Aș putea să vă spun perspectiva și viziunea personală și nu numai personală, ci și a Federației Sanitas din care fac parte, care este cea mai mare federație din sănătate din România. Avem peste 100.000 de membri și reprezentăm undeva la 41% ca și grad de sindicalizare din sectorul public de sănătate. Au fost niște ani extrem de grei, exact cum este amintită și în carte, în special în acei ani 2009-2011, când cine a citit cartea a văzut foarte clar că într-o dimineață ne-am trezit pur și simplu în urma unei semnături cu dispariția subită a 68 de spitale, aproape 70 de spitale, pentru că la acel moment Partidul Liberal-Democrat și președintele Băsescu au înțeles că în urma sugestiilor de la Uniunea Europeană de a reduce costurile pentru sistemul sanitar, ar fi bine să se reducă numărul de paturi și, bineînțeles, partea salarială. Așa că cea mai simplă și rapidă soluție a fost eliminarea a 68 de spitale, rămânând încă și la acest moment arii care pe o zonă radială de peste 50 de kilometri față de anumite sate nu există niciun fel de unitate spitalicească, nici măcar de prim ajutor. Sunt zone care am putea să le spunem deșertificate din punct de vedere medical. Mai mult decât atât, practic în urma dispariției celor 68 de spitale, tot n-a fost suficient pentru că nu se încadra în deficitul bugetar România, așa că tot guvernul de la acel moment și președintele de la acel moment, aș putea spune de tristă amintire pentru toată România, au decis să mai taie 25% din veniturile tuturor angajaților din sistemele publice din România. Ca să înțelegeți, un lucru esențial este că sistemul sanitar în România, din punct de vedere al venitului, are două componente. Este vorba de salariul de bază, care, așa cum v-am spus, a fost redus cu 25%, și este vorba de sporuri sau legea bonusurilor, pentru a fi mai ușor de tradus. Aceste două componente formează venitul salariaților, în special din zona de sănătate și asistență socială. Deci, practic, dacă ai un spor de 50%, pentru că lucrezi în zona de terapie intensivă sau un bloc operator chirurgie și ți-a tăiat salariul cu 25%, practic acest spor de 50% aplicat pe un salariu diminuat cu încă 25% înseamnă 35%. Deci, din păcate, acest lucru nu a făcut decât să ducă la o depopulare și o migrație a creierelor la nivel european, încât din 2007 până în 2018 peste 35.000 de asistente și peste 15.000 de medici au plecat din România. Tragic este că, din păcate, personalul care a rămas a trebuit să preia tot ceea ce aceștia făceau. Este o încărcătură extraordinar de mare de sarcini la acest nivel în România. Singura soluție care a reușit-o Federația Sanitas pentru a stopa migrația aceasta activă a tuturor profesiunilor în sănătate este să creeze o nouă lege de salarizare în urma negocierilor cu guvernul, iar în 2018 am reușit să avem o majorare salarială semnificativă pentru a bloca mare parte. Din păcate, acest lucru în urma pandemiei de COVID-19 s-a redus foarte mult. Inflația, știți că România este în top și salariile sunt în continuare diminuate, volumul de muncă a rămas, problemele post-COVID au rămas în continuare, drept pentru care România la acest moment suferă de un deficit extrem de mare de profesioniști, atât în sănătate cât și în servicii sociale, fapt ce a dus la apariția mai multor mișcări de protest și cu acestea o să închid, pentru că deja am vorbit foarte mult. Încă câteva lucruri importante de spus. Din păcate, în România, deși și-a asumat la nivel european să facă parte la nivel european din pacienții la nivel european trebuie să aibă un dosar electronic. În România nu există nici măcar o rețea electronică la nivel național în care să poți să-ți vezi datele din punct de vedere medical din sudul României, în nordul României, dacă te duce. Deci pentru România este nevoie și de o infuzie de capital pe zona de digitalizare, pentru că este digitalizarea aproape minimală. Așa cum este și în carte spus, procentul din PIB alocat României este cel mai mic, undeva la 6,2, dacă nu mă înșel anul acesta, cred că suntem ultima sau penultima țară ca și investiție din PIB în Uniunea Europeană, drept pentru care cel mai important lucru care am putut să-l facem este să-mi conving colegii că atunci când nu mai putem și nu mai avem ce să negociem în țară, trebuie să mergem la Bruxelles. Le mulțumesc de încredere colegilor care au venit alături de mine. Am fost 210 persoane care am participat la Bruxelles și am venit cu avionul. Am găsit variantă low cost pe Charleroi și am venit cu avionul și am plecat în afară cu avionul. Atât cât am putut, am încercat să stopăm privatizarea spitalelor și tot ce am reușit, și chiar am reușit, este să nu existe privatizare în România. Singurul lucru care n-am putut să-l împiedicăm, este ultimul cuvânt promit, este externalizarea unor servicii, cum este laboratorul de analize medicale, pază, partea de bucătărie, imagistică, RMN, computer tomograf, aceste lucruri s-au externalizat, dar undeva în 2018 au început să fie reinternalizate parte din ele și acest lucru a dus la un progres. Mulțumesc mult și scuze.
Thank you very much, Razvan. Now we move to my left, to Yves Hellersdorf, who is a trade unionist from the French-speaking part of Belgium. and also an activist in a European network that goes beyond EPSU members, also including social movements and unions like SUD in France. And so please share with you your impression of the book and the challenges that you were facing in your campaign at the European level.
Oui, tout d'abord, en effet, je suis au départ infirmier et syndicaliste dans le secteur non marchand, donc essentiellement l'associatif sans but lucratif dans le santé, sociale et culture. Mais ça fait maintenant déjà quelques années que nous suivons les travaux de Sabina et de Roland. Non, d'abord, c'est vous qu'on a connu. Hein. Je ne dis pas que le livre, c'est rien que vous deux. Je dis que ça fait des années qu'on vous connaît, que vous intervenez dans le décryptage de l'action européenne en faveur de la commercialisation, de la libéralisation des services publics et des services à la population. Donc ça fait quand même quelques années qu'on se suit et qu'on vous invite dans les conférences pour venir éclairer les militants que nous sommes d'une analyse sérieuse et peu discutable par les politiques. Donc ça nous aide énormément. Alors, à la lecture de ce livre, donc, qui a été fait par une équipe de 5 personnes, mais vraiment qui, moi, m'a passionné, on peut se dire que c'est une source vraiment inouïe de référence, utile à la compréhension des mécanismes de gouvernance européenne, un décryptage fin de la feuille de route libérale en matière de conduite des budgets des différents pays en Europe, mais aussi une analyse chronologique de l'interaction entre l'Union européenne et les mouvements sociaux, dont les mouvements syndicaux. Ce qui est en plus, c'est qu'il nous donne une vision de ce qu'il y a lieu de faire si on veut inverser les choses, si on veut ne pas être seulement les spectateurs, voire les victimes de cette politique. Alors, l'analyse plus fine encore qui a été faite dans le livre au niveau des 4 pays qui ont été analysés nous démontre réellement le rôle fondamental que l'Europe joue à différents niveaux vers une commercialisation. D'une part, la nouvelle gouvernance économique européenne a évidemment largement joué sur la commercialisation des services publics, essentiellement depuis quelques années à travers les recommandations qui étaient d'autant plus fortes vers certains pays que ces pays n'avaient pas encore libéralisé leurs services. Elles étaient moins fortes là où les pays avaient déjà fait un travail de libéralisation. Donc on voit bien qu'au niveau européen, cette technique de recommandation spécifique à travers le semestre européen a amené à situer chacun des pays, mais chaque mouvement social dans les différents pays, face à une seule feuille de route pour eux-mêmes, mais qui ne correspondait pas aux feuilles de route des autres pays et des autres mouvements sociaux. Mais cette dynamique n'a pas seulement visé les services publics, et ils ont évidemment mis le focus sur 3 secteurs, le transport, l'eau et les soins de santé, mais ils ont aussi analysé l'influence volontaire de ces recommandations sur les relations sociales, les relations de travail. Et là, c'est clair que la volonté est de faire en sorte que les relations collectives de travail ne soient plus un outil pour améliorer les conditions de travail ou les conditions salariales du personnel, le bien-être de la population, mais bien un outil d'harmonisation vers un marché public, un marché commun hein, et donc vers avec des logiques ou des valeurs de libre concurrence. Hein, et donc de dire les relations collectives, elles doivent servir à ce qu'il y ait des mêmes logiques partout et que la concurrence ne soit pas faussée d'un côté ou d'un autre. Donc elles vont essayer de ralentir, de dire aux pays comme l'Allemagne, par exemple, il faut augmenter vos salaires parce que vos produits, sinon, vont envahir les autres, hein, où ils vont être dans des logiques comme ça, où on va utiliser les relations collectives comme un soutien à un marché unique et non plus du tout vers un bien-être de la population. Et c'est clair que dans notre travail de syndicaliste, notre prise de conscience du rôle de l'Europe, elle vient au moment de Bolkestein. Hein. C'est clair que là, les mouvements sociaux, les mouvements syndicaux se sont mis en route et on dit mais non, c'est pas possible. Une Europe, nous sommes européens, nous voulons vraiment la solidarité entre les peuples, mais si c'est l'Europe qui vient en disant que tous les services à la population sont des services commerciaux, ça ne va plus, quoi. Et là, c'est clair que nous avons eu, à la fois du côté des mouvements sociaux et des syndicats, des mouvements transnationaux qui ont permis de faire reculer la Commission européenne. Et là, en effet, on a pu voir qu'il était possible de changer l'Europe. Ça a été possible. Pourquoi ne serait-ce pas dorénavant encore possible? Et donc, nous, à notre petit niveau belge, et dans mon organisation syndicale, c'est clair qu'à partir de ce moment-là, on a essayé de travailler sur une série de niveaux, notamment en nous alliant avec des mouvements sociaux. Donc on a, au niveau belge, lancé une plateforme d'action santé-solidarité avec les mutuelles de santé, avec des universitaires, des ONG, etc. Au niveau européen, on a lancé un réseau européen dont Yann fait partie, un réseau qui maintenant s'appelle Notre santé n'est pas à vendre, mais qui au départ s'appelait de lutte contre la commercialisation de la santé, donc clairement identifié dans cette logique-là. Et on a, au niveau intersectoriel, lancé des initiatives comme Alter Summit, une série d'initiatives qui faisaient en sorte que les syndicats, avec leur capacité structurante et de pérennisation, s'associent avec des mouvements sociaux qui eux-mêmes avaient leur spécificité, mais aussi leur énergie, leur capacité à mobiliser sur des thèmes un peu plus moins pérennes, mais en tout cas plus mobilisateurs. Et ça, c'est clair que c'est suite à Bolkestein, suite à ça qu'on s'est dit c'est possible. Entre-temps, évidemment, nous avons choisi, en tant qu'organisation qui étions actifs dans les secteurs plutôt associatifs, donc privés, de nous affilier à EPSU plutôt qu'à UNI, qui est l'autre fédération patronale, fédération européenne des syndicats, parce que pour nous, il fallait accrocher clairement l'ensemble des services au public, même s'ils étaient délégués, à des logiques de service public. Et donc, de garantir que ça puisse être retiré des logiques de marché. Les publications de l'étude, évidemment, nous permettent de comprendre pourquoi aujourd'hui il semble plus difficile de développer des actions transnationales, parce que, comme je vous l'ai dit tout à l'heure, mais on l'a dit déjà avant, le fait qu'on travaille maintenant non plus par des directives, donc une dynamique démocratique et transnationale du côté européen, mais plutôt par les recommandations du semestre identifiées pour chacun des pays à des timings différents, ça fait qu'aujourd'hui, il est beaucoup plus compliqué d'avoir des gens qui ont les mêmes préoccupations en même temps. Et ça, c'est clairement pas un hasard. C'est clairement une stratégie de division et de mise en d'éparpillement des enjeux sociaux que nous vivons chacun dans nos pays et qui rendent de plus en plus difficile une démarche commune transnationale. Et puis, je voudrais en tout cas dire que si on regarde aujourd'hui le moment présent, et quand je dis le moment présent, c'est bien évidemment présent, nous avons hier la Commission qui a annoncé une procédure de déficit excessif pour 13 pays, c'est clair que quand on voit les recommandations du semestre, par exemple pour la Belgique, les dernières, il y en a donc en fonction de la même grille d'analyse que celle qui est dans le livre. Donc à chaque fois, ils disent, est-ce qu'il y a des recommandations qui pourraient aller vers moins de marchandisation? Est-ce qu'il y en a quand même? Tu disais, on a socialisé un peu les recommandations du semestre, par exemple en matière de santé. Oui, on dit qu'il faut développer une meilleure formation, plus d'inclusion dans le marché du travail, des choses comme ça. Donc, dans les recommandations, il y a quelques petits éléments qui vont dans ce sens-là, et notamment, on a vu dans les recommandations, par exemple pour la Roumanie, il y en a quelques-unes aussi. Mais par contre, en même temps, ils nous disent, la pension chez vous, ça coûte trop cher. Là, il faut réduire. Ils nous disent en même temps, le déficit public, c'est impossible. Donc 37 milliards d'euros en Belgique à récupérer. 37 milliards d'euros. Et donc, comment voulez-vous, par exemple, en matière de soins de santé, revaloriser le personnel de santé, lui donner des conditions de travail correctes, si en même temps on nous dit oui, il faut maintenir votre personnel infirmier qui n'arrête pas et qui ne s'enfuit pas, mais en même temps, on dit, vous devez faire avec 37 milliards d'euros en moins. Donc, je pense que c'est cette dynamique-là qu'on découvre vraiment de façon très claire dans cet ouvrage, c'est le fait qu'il y a du social watching, je ne sais pas si ça se dit, mais enfin, donc c'est un peu comme le greenwashing, c'est de dire, on va y mettre un petit peu de social pour faire croire que dorénavant, l'Europe sociale, elle existe, mais dans les faits, c'est du washing. Et derrière, les grandes tendances, elles sont là, elles sont une libéralisation de l'ensemble des services à la population et notamment des services de santé. Et en ce qui nous concerne, nous avons quand même des doutes importants sur le fait de dire qu'il suffirait d'ajouter quelques critères de type plus social aux recommandations et à la logique de pression de la Commission européenne. J'entends la logique, il faut démocratiser la gestion économique de l'Europe, certainement, donc il faut que ça ne passe plus par la technocratie bureaucratique, je dirais, de la Commission uniquement. Il faut un contrôle par rapport à cela, mais il faut modifier le paradigme. Aujourd'hui, les syndicats nationaux et les fédérations européennes de syndicats ne peuvent plus se contenter de dire il faut à la marge socialiser un petit peu les choses. Nous avons un ennemi commun, c'est un marché unique basé sur le seul dogme que la libre concurrence, la libre installation et le marché va donner un bien-être à la population. La pandémie nous a rappelé, nous a fait une dose de vaccin, et celle-là, on ne doit pas faire de rappel, on n'en a pas besoin, on le sait, on sait maintenant que le marché est nuisible à la population.
Merci Yves. So thank you very much, Yves. Now we introduce you to Kalle Kunkel, who is an activist at a local level, but of course everything is relative, because Berlin-Brandenburg is possibly as big as Wallonia in terms of people living there. But he was very active in an interesting campaign in Germany for better working conditions and secure staffing level at the Hospital of Charité in Berlin. Which is also interesting because whereas in Ireland, in the so-called liberal capitalist Ireland, we still have collective agreement for the entire national level, in many German hospitals, the fight is now taking on hospital by hospital in the so-called coordinated German economy, which is not as coordinated anymore. And so we're very happy that Kalle is here and tell us his perspective on the book. Because Germany, as we have seen, has been a victim of these neoliberal recipes even before the semester was introduced. and serves actually as a model for the European semester to be used in other countries.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I like to read the book very much because for me, as working on the local level, it puts on a perspective that you usually don't see so much, and also as someone who was very involved also to tackle theoretically, especially the financing system of the hospital sector. We always thought that very much from the perspective of national developments. And I will later on say why I still think that is the right perspective in Germany, but still it's, in the first sight, it's interesting to have a look on the question, how is it maybe influenced by EU-level prescriptions or politics that we not necessarily see on the local level when we just see the outcomes. So from this perspective, it was a very interesting insight to read this book. What I also think is very important, or an important point that the book that the book makes, is the question to decode specific terms. What you said with this cost efficiency. What is cost efficiency? We had a big reform on the hospital sector in Germany in 2015, which was on the big overhead was quality. And of course, when you have a reform that says we improve quality, no one can say something against it. But what they did, concrete, when you look at the technical terms, it was marketization and commercialization or commodification. I mean, the words are a little bit blurry here, I think. I want to make 3 points. The first thing is, as I said before, for us in Germany, I think one important point is that compared to the other countries we heard now, that the EU level is not so important for what happens on the ground. We have now a big hospital reform, which is interestingly after COVID one main issue of this hospital reform is to reduce the capacities of the hospitals. Although you would imagine that after COVID there would be a debate about that it was good that we have this capacity. They managed to make a really interesting plot twist to turn it into an argument why we need less hospital beds, because we have not the short plot twist is because we don't have enough nurses, we have to reduce the beds so the nurses can care for the rest of the beds that stay. The second thing is, when I read the book and I read what kind of recommendation have made to Germany, that these are not the issues that we are in the moment fighting. For example, this hospital reform, another big issue in the moment in Germany is that we have a big commercialization of the registered physicians, like on the local level, where we have private equity money that conquers this area and creates, how do you call it, medical care centers, which is a progressive idea in the first place, but they do it on the hegemony of capital. So, and the interesting thing for me was that all this is not part of the prescription you describe in the book. But these are the fights we have in Germany. And this is, and you give an explanation also in the book why it is so. And the first thing is, Germany is the vanguard in questions of liberalization, commodification of healthcare. And the second thing is, that the strategy of new economic governance and the strategy of threatening are not so coercive in Germany, because we are, as Germany, we were never so much dependent on these programs. Yeah. So it was not so easy to impose these programs on Germany, but the interesting thing is it was not needed, because we did it 10 to 15 years before. And I think this is, for me, the second point which I learned from that, to see how much, for example, the financing system of diagnosis-related groups, DRGs, is spread now all over Europe, which we already implemented. It started 2000, and then finally 2003 and 2004 we implemented it for good, and by then had the most commercialized financing system in the whole Europe. And now we see that out of this experience, Europe learns to adopt it. And of course, we made now 15, 20 years of experiences with that system, and we exactly can describe what is the problem with the system and why it is not cost efficiency to implement such marketization strategies, because actually our system is costs more now. The costs increase all the time, but they go in private funds and go into the profits. So what I see as one task for us as German unions is, out of that experience or out of that insight, that we have to spread our experiences with that, not with also with organizing and everything. We have to network about it, but the other side, the liberalizations, they spread their experiences all the time, and they learn from each other, and we have to learn from each other too, what kind of experience we have and what kind of systems maybe work as we had them, for example, before. Because now we have a big debate in Germany for a few years now about the question if that marketization works. And we have decommodification strategies that start, for example, with the paying of the nurses, especially, the payment of the nurses is put out of the DRG system, but I don't think that this is known all over Europe. That while in other countries they start to implement the system, we start to cut parts of the financing of the hospitals now out of the system, and I think we have to talk about that more. Second thing is what is for me really concrete. When I read about this, you have this theory that they thought, okay, marketization is not fast enough, so they started with direct political coercive powers. We had, and you also said this, that healthcare in principle is not part of the how you say, on the competence of the EU. What we have now in Berlin is that for the first time we have a really big attack from a coalition of for-profit and non-profit private hospitals that sue the government of Berlin on the basis of competition law, to say you are subsidizing your public hospitals too much. And they started with going to the German courts, and now they threaten to go to the European level with it, which would mean that we will have now for the first time maybe a decision on the question if that is part of European competences or not. We had already one court ruling about this question 10 years ago, where it was very specific, and now they go in the core of this question. And it's not only Berlin. We saw then, after they started the suing, that there is an employers association for the private hospitals that started to make a list on their homepage in which areas the municipalities support their hospitals. So they start to gather the knowledge. If then when they are successful in this conflict, then they can expand it over whole Germany. And that would mean that in a lot of cases, like these are hospitals that are subsidized because it's the only hospital in the area. And when the municipalities lose their right to subsidize them, then we have a very big problem, much more, or that radicalizes the problem we already have, because we also have increasingly the problem that especially the rural areas have a lack of hospital coverage. Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, we would like to ask you whether you have any questions or comments from the public. We have still 10, 15 minutes. Yes? So now we have 20 minutes. We have 20 minutes. The mic is, we have had a mobile mic. Where is the mobile mic?
There's the mobile mic.
Okay, there is the mobile mic.
Yeah,
very good.
push the button.
Okay, I have a question for you, Carl, because it's, I'm sorry. I'm Bart. I'm from Belgium. I am active in the elderly sector in the Flemish part of Belgium. We have commercialization also in that sector, and we are fighting against it. And what I hear you're talking about is the reverse of what we're trying to do in the elderly section in Belgium, in Flanders. So it means that if there is a ruling, a definite ruling, that probably the entire hospital sector is privatized. No, when there is a ruling in Germany, so government cannot subsidize any hospital anymore. Or did I not get it right?
So, maybe we can collect several points, several interventions. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Okay, here we
I
have.
wanted to.
Okay, very good.
Yeah,
Very good.
it's okay. I wanted to add, if that's the legal part, but from the
It's on.
it's on or not? It's on. Okay, from the union perspective, are you active fighting against it in Berlin and in Germany? Because I think it's important to do so and not only wait for a legal result.
Okay. So, Sabina?
Hello. It's on? It's on? Yes, thanks for all the presentations. I'm Sabina, stand from Dublin City University, and I was indeed working on the chapter from the book on healthcare. So as well as on the methodology, which was through Castet. It's very difficult to read and decode these policy prescriptions and this very technocratic language. For Kale, if I remember well, I have to go back into the book, my notes. The Commission in its country reports, I think it might even have been in 2019, so just before the COVID in 2020, that in the country report, which is kind of preparing the recommendations, yeah, that they make subsequently. They were commenting on the oversized hospital sector in Germany, because at that time it was I think it was the highest number per of beds something like that, or in Europe.
In European comparison, we have relative much beds per.
And then, yeah, so it might, of course, during COVID, also because the choice was a particular way to deal with the disease that results from the infection, which is COVID, was to kind of let people until they need to go to the hospital. There were also voices from Chiara in the, from the public health movement Europe that the network worked with. They were advocating for an approach that would put much more stress on dealing with the issue not by hospitals, but by the primary care. So that's another issue as well. But anyway, there is a continuity. Yeah, COVID seemed to have demonstrated the importance, but there is very much continuity. And the second point, listening to what you say and what is happening, the new conflicts and coalitions to move, to continue commodification, privatization. Maybe there is, maybe that's, let's look at it, let's analyze it, let's understand what is happening in Germany, because these are tactics that can be eventually uploaded in maybe another form at the European level in the future. Thanks.
Okay. Some other questions? Okay. Would you like to respond directly?
Yeah.
Because
it's a little bit complicated. It's a question of additional subsidies that is on fire here. It's not the question that the state or it's a public sick fund, sickness fund, who is paying for the hospitals. So this is the usual system. We have a system where the sickness fund pays for the hospitals, like for the cases, and the per patient. That's the DRG system, and the investments have to be financed in the idea by the federal by the local government. And what is on stake here is that the local government doesn't give his this support for the investments like in equal share to all the hospitals. And it is like that they give more to the public hospitals, and they say then, okay, but that's also something you describe in the book, because what they did in the years before was that they commodified the way in which this support or the subsidies for the investments had to be dealt with. So now it's possible to say we would have this amount, or you had to pay us this amount and them this amount, but you gave them more, so we have the right to, you give them less or we get more. And of course, under austerity, it will mean that they give less to the public, and then we have a problem. So it's not about that then state funding is not possible anymore. And the question. But here also a systematical question. That's interesting that it was an issue on the European level, but we have this issue for 20 years now in Germany. Like this is, all the reforms are always, one reason is we have to reduce the capacities of the hospitals. Let's put it, you don't need, in Germany, you don't need the EU to get these ideas.
Okay. Yves?
Juste quelques réflexions. Je vais parler moins fort peut-être. Tout d'abord, la notion de santé et l'exclusion de la santé des logiques de marché formellement au niveau européen, c'est aussi un des éléments, je trouve, qui pose problème, parce que les pays, donc les pouvoirs nationaux, remettre la responsabilité principale et unique à l'Europe, en disant c'est à cause de l'Europe qu'on privatise. Il faut être attentif, je pense. Autant nous devons faire des mouvements transnationaux pour arriver à ce que l'Europe change, autant dans ces matières, les gouvernements nationaux ont encore des compétences importantes et peuvent encore aujourd'hui résister à une série de mesures. Mais c'est beaucoup plus facile de dire, comme dans les autres pays, on ne le dit pas en Belgique, mais dans les autres pays, on dit c'est Bruxelles, c'est Bruxelles, et ça fait en sorte qu'on ne doit pas avoir en face de soi l'autorité et être en conflit interne dans son pays. Ça, je trouve que c'est un premier élément qui fait en sorte que la solidarité européenne est plus compliquée. Deuxième élément, il y a d'autres thèmes que la santé sur lesquels on a déjà eu recours à la justice. Bart. Donc il y a d'autres thèmes que la santé sur lesquels il y a déjà eu des attaques en matière de concurrence déloyale. Donc par exemple la remise à l'emploi, donc tout ce qui est l'insertion socio-professionnelle en Belgique est attaqué, donc ce qui est le mouvement associatif de soutien aux personnes sans emploi est attaqué par les firmes d'intérim qui elles considèrent que c'est un marché qui devrait être totalement libéralisé et que l'État n'a pas le droit de subventionner. Mais ne parlons pas de la culture, ne parlons pas... Donc nous sommes sans arrêt en train de savoir jusqu'où on doit défendre ces notions de service d'intérêt général qui sont exclus des logiques de marché. Et là, il y a un combat beaucoup plus large que celui de la santé uniquement.
So that's come to a conclusion of our panel because we are not working now. So now it's working, I think. Now it's very well working. So what we did is looking not just at different countries, but also at different sectors. And a lot of the questions, that one that you mentioned, are interesting. So read also chapters on transport, because transport was the first to be commodified, the first to be liberalized. And in transport you see, you liberalize, you bring in private trains, and then the private trains are then used to say the subsidies for public trains are against your competition law, etc. So you have the battles there. So we can learn from the battles in transport. And then on the other side, in water, where there was the most successful counter-movement with a European Citizen Initiative that indeed succeeded in keeping water in the public sector. Water is a human right, where we have 2 million signatures for your European Citizen Initiative, and as a result, the European Commission excluded water from the concession directive, and that was possible because actually Germany was not ahead, Germany was behind. So the German local Verdi water people were also threatened as much as water people in Ireland were threatened by commodification. So there was a convergence of struggle, and then we were able to win and defend public water. And then, but last but not least, you said, Dominika said at the end, that at the end we draw a gloomy picture about the new economic governance system. Yes and no. Yes and no, because we actually showed that the employers were so secure that they will defeat the European Minimum Wage Directive that introduces now minimum standards of 60% of median wage for workers in a country, and also includes targets of 80% collective bargaining coverage. European employers were so convinced that they will defeat this proposal that von der Leyen did propose, because she needed some workers' support, also some social support for the European project. But then Esther Lynch, who was at the time of the Troika intervention a legal person of the Irish trade unions, and made the argument Europe has no competence in the area of wage policy. She did the argument, many cases even went to the European Court and they all lost. Then she looked to the employers and said, you say there is no competence for wage policy, so you're saying, business, that all the Troika interventions, all the recommendations on wages were illegal. And therefore she could then put the Commission on the back foot and turn the competence argument around. So if you have the competence to cut our wages, you have also the responsibility to make sure adequate minimum wages, make sure adequate collective bargaining coverage. And I understand EPSU Health Committee is now taking some of the ideas of your battles in Berlin, so if you can cut hospital beds, if you can close hospitals in Romania, you can also do adequate staffing levels. You can turn the argument around, and there could be a space for European minimum wage staffing level directive. And that is, in my view, the alternative to European semester. Of course, the European semester will stay there, but what never happened in the European semester recommendation is recommendations that go against European law. So the protection against this commodifying, commercializing interventions is to protect, for instance, wages with minimum wage directive and maybe not a European directive on minimum staffing levels to protect public services, or the exclusion of public services from concessions directive, as it happened in the water case. So I think that is indeed, the struggle has to be everywhere at the local and the transnational level, and we hoped to make a contribution to your fights by documenting what is going on. And by, so I just invite you to download the book. It's for free. It's actually public sector work as well. So it was funded by the European Research Council, which is a European public sector. And therefore you can download it for free using the QR code on the flyer or the website also indicated on the flyer. So thanks for coming. And I'm looking forward to continue our discussion afterwards in the break or at other occasions. Thanks for coming. And thanks for our panelists. And Bianca, so we have, the book is there, but we have it only in one copy because Cambridge broke down because they use a global supply chain, and the books for you are lost between India and Europe. So it's a good sign that doesn't work, but we'll send up the book afterwards when it eventually arrives in Dublin.